Field ecology could take place anywhere. Right now, we're not too far out of the town of Abuvian in the country of Armenia. And what we're doing is working with Armenian vipers. They live in concert with agriculturalists, horticulturalists, and pastoralists. How they live together is a fascinating ecological study, and that's what we're here looking at.
Animals are very tolerant to humans, and where humans do not disturb them, animals just come very close. And what I observed in protected areas, just the wildlife are roaming everywhere, just because humans don't disturb them. That's interesting to find the limits of tolerance, humans to wildlife and wildlife to humans.
But at the same time, we need to be very careful with snakes. Actually, the places where they are building the buildings, which is around where the living is venomous and dangerous snakes.
People here in Armenia don't like snakes in general, especially poisonous ones, because they consider some danger from them. But they don't realize and don't care that nature itself, it's like a chain. Everything is linked to each other. If they destroy one chain, they will lose another part of the chain.
Be able to inform people, not only just about the Armenian viper, but about snakes in general and the role that they play. The fact that, just because you're afraid of it doesn't mean you have to kill it. Through Wild Care Institute, one of our, the goals of the Institute is not just to collect scientific, information, but to impart technology like we've done with the radio telemetry to colleagues in foreign countries, and also to educate, that it has to be this really overarching approach that has multi-facets that come into play, because you can collect all the scientific information you want and come up with a conservation strategy, but if you can't get buy-in from the people that live here, then it's never going to succeed.
When we go to the mountains, people always ask us, why don't we carry the firearms? Because it's dangerous, because there are many bears there and wolves. I say they're just the only animal that I fear are people, and firearms will not help. I've seen many venomous vipers, so it's not a problem. Just people have the need to know how to behave with animals in the correct way, because animals do not attack people just without reason. If not cornered, animal will never attack you. Just don't go to the cave if you know that the brown bear is inside. That's simple.
So, for example, if the places where the humans can go. So the reason of the state reserve is that no people come and disturb these places, and disturb their natural habitats.
Even what we're finding out about the viper is going to have more far-reaching implications for a lot of other species, because if you're protecting habitat for one species, you're taking in everything else as well. Snakes are a vital part of the ecosystem. They eat a lot of rodents, and they're also food for other animals. a long-term project. But I think, you know, that at the same time, we'll actually branch out and start studying some other species of reptiles here and other types of wildlife as well, and hopefully be able to bring that all together into a really good package of, you know, this is how we can manage the environment here in Armenia.
Learning by doing. We need to go away from theoretical education. We need to do something practical. Because recently, for example, I heard a very smart idea that if you hear, you forget, if you see, you remember, and if you do, you learn. That's true. Because, for example, I don't know about different countries, but in Armenia, education in biology and in environment, it's purely theoretical. So students don't have an opportunity to go to the mountains to learn and see what they hear about. So they finish their education, they get their degree, and they just stop because they don't understand what they do and for what. So we need to move children and students to nature.
We have to remember always is that extinctions are forever. And also we lose in species. We're impoverishing our own life as well as the future generations. And that is something that is well known on islands and island ecosystem, how bad the extinction have wiped out, the flora and fauna of some of those islands. Galapagos, in that sense, is the only oceanic archipelago that still maintains 95% of the original biodiversity. So here is a golden opportunity for the whole world to save this huge amount of treasures, if you want, and learn those lessons for future generations.
Islands are a microcosm of the world, and so if you look at islands, you can actually see what's going on in the world because you reach limits much more quickly in islands. Social issues are much more exacerbated in islands. Ecological impacts tend to be much more exacerbated as well. And there are a set of characteristics about islands that make them quite fascinating places to try and understand the interactions between the social and the ecological. If you could do that better, and actually come up with solutions to those problems, I think that there's a lot of lessons learned that can be transferred to other places.
Eric Miller and I were having a conversation about what we could do that was collaborative and that actually involved the work that my group was already doing in the Galapagos Islands. And he said, in a list of possibilities, he said, well, we could do something with looking for diseases there. And then we went on and discussed several things down the list. And I said, can we go back to that disease thing? And what we didn't know was at that exact time, people here in the station and the park were discussing the problem of the arrival of new diseases. And so they were primed to hear that we were interested in doing this, and themselves had just recognized it as a huge problem.
I think one of the most wonderful things about the program is that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. The field biologists bring expertise to the program, the veterinarians, and it's the cooperation, and then the cooperation with the people in the Galapagos that really make this work, and I think make it a unique program.
I think a lot of people do look at the Galapagos as it's been kind of an iconic place, as we know, for many years. But having the Galapagos name, I think it is important that things are done right here and that we're a part of doing them right, because you kind of are maybe looked at more closely than you would be in some other corners of the world. It's really been fantastic to see how people have just responded and said, we're not just going to talk about acting immediately, we're going to act immediately. And that's from the government down to volunteers that we have helping fill up bottles of equipment so we can put our samples in. So it's been a real group effort in a very short time.
The good news is that the collaboration is so tight that we discover this, we come here, we talk to them, and they immediately come up with an action plan and are on top of it and sending people out there. And so this collaboration has really worked beautifully.
In a lot of ways, the Galapagos is the best of both worlds. They combine a national park with great scientific management. They combine a wonderful place to visit with real restrictions on ecotourism. They have managed to develop their economy without taking this fabulous beachfront and building hundreds of condominiums on it.
We have, I would say, the good luck to have wonderful partners and strategic alliances that are fundamental for the work that we do here. And one of those, the fundamental and extremely important alliances that we have is with the University of St. Louis, Missouri, and the St. Louis Zoo, with Dr. Patty Parker and her work here, for example.
Looking at how sustainability is created so that you can keep places like Galapagos, which continue to change people's lives. Because I think the world would be a lot sorrier of a place if it didn't have a place like Galapagos.
My personal dream in this sense is that I want to give that opportunity to future generations, that they could get to know Galapagos as we have known Galapagos, and get to love Galapagos the way we love Galapagos, and that hopefully the world will get some lessons out of a place like Galapagos. If we cannot save Galapagos, then what are we doing here in this world?
My name is Michael Masek. I'm curator of birds at the St. Louis Zoo, and today we're going to talk a little bit about the Wild Care Institute and its involvement with the horned guan. The horned guan is a critically endangered bird found in Mexico and Guatemala. They're found at high elevation cloud forests between 7,000 and 12,000 feet. And the plants that are found in these areas are very unique, and that's one of the reasons that the horned guan is only found in that area. So what we're doing is nutritionally analyzing the foods that the horned guan eat. They eat 63 varieties of fruits, leaves, and flowers. So we have to go at different times of the year when those particular items are in bloom or in fruit and collect them. And then we're taking those samples and sending them to 2 different labs in Mexico to look at the nutritional value of those items and how important they are at different times of the year for this species. And the reason this is important, there's actually 2 elements. One thing, it will help us to create captive diets for the birds that are in Mexico and actually here in St. Louis, and we have the only pair of horned guans in the United States. But it'll also help us maintain more habitat, because if we understand why those different types of plants are important to the bird, we could potentially save more habitat. Because if we can find the plant in different areas and we know that that's important to the horned guan, it gives us sort of more opportunity to convince the governments of Guatemala and Mexico to conserve those areas for this critically endangered bird. There's only about 1,000 to 2,000 birds left in just these 2 isolated areas in El Triunfo, Mexico, where we're working, and in Guatemala near Lake Atitlan. This species is endangered primarily because of habitat destruction. These high cloud forest areas are also prime habitat for coffee. And so a lot of coffee plantations are slowly making their way up the mountain. And what happens is then you essentially have these islands of populations, because the birds won't come lower down the mountain and they won't fly from one peak to the next peak. They're sort of similar to a turkey. They can fly, but not really well. So what happens is, as the plantations work their way up the mountain, you have isolated populations, habitat deforestation, and there is some hunting of the species in Guatemala as well. So to date, we have about 1/3 of the plants analyzed, and we have at least 3 more trips planned this year, hoping to get a comprehensive picture of those 63 species of plants that the animal eats. One thing that's really important when you're analyzing the diet of any animal is that when you're collecting the fruits or the seeds or the leaf, whatever the animal eats, is that you're collecting it in the same state. For example, some birds prefer really ripe fruits, some really green fruits, some really green leaves, some mature leaves and seeds, etc. So that's why we have to go at different times of the year and collect the fruit or the seed or the leaf or the flower in the exact same state as when the animal eats it, because nutritionally it could be very different. Coffee farming is certainly a threat to the species with regard to habitat loss. And one of the things we can do at home is to buy shade-grown coffee. And this is a method where they actually grow the coffee that is in a way that it's compatible with the wildlife that lives there. So the next time you buy coffee, think about buying shade-grown coffee. It helps not just the horned guan, but a lot of other birds and animals that are found in the cloud forests of Mexico and Guatemala.
We are on the desert coast. The land is barren like a moonscape, yet when it reaches the coast, there's this incredible explosion of life, and that's because of these cold ocean currents coming up from Antarctica, and cold water generally supports a larger diversity of sea life, and because of the sea life we have the sea lions and the penguins and the Inca terns, and but it's the concentration of all those things together in such a small spot that for me is just almost emotionally and mentally overwhelming, but it kind of gives me a high that I can't get in a lot of different places.
Once you step for the first time in San Juan, you just fall madly in love with the place, and just 30 years later I'm still there, and although less closely attached to the work happening there, but I think what I'm doing now is affecting it in a more long-term way, because like you can't just protect the land. You have to make sure that whatever's affecting it outside also is controlled. So.
This is a natural gas exporting plant, so obviously a lot of large tanker ships coming in and out of the area. Potential for spills associated with that. The shanty town that we can kind of see behind us is just kind of sprung up in association with this plant. So
yeah, something like probably hundreds of people that weren't even here just a year or two ago.
Yeah, and with that, the garbage and the pollution that the people bring with them, as well as increased hunting along the coastlines, increased fishing, just can be very damaging to these marine ecosystems. These chicken farms really line most of the coastal regions of the southern part of Peru. One thing that we're concerned about is what diseases these chickens may have or what they may be harboring, and then what risk that poses to a lot of these seabird populations, and specifically the Humboldt penguin.
The penguins have traditionally used guano as a burrowing habitat. And so they nest inside the guano, and this is one of the best habitats for them to breed.
What I'm standing on right now is guano. It looks like soil, but it's actually a lot of bird feces, which is really high in nitrogen, which is a great source of fertilizer.
Be careful that when you do take the guano, whatever you do is done during times when the local wildlife is not affected. You can't just say don't fish, because it's in a poor country like ours, you can't do that.
And there's been some new methods of fishing recently, and they're using dynamite. Just dropping dynamite into the ocean, and everything basically gets blown up that's there, including penguins.
One of our main goals with this project is really to have a very proactive approach to our efforts here. So we're trying to gather this data to prevent any sort of potential future problems.
Animales, quizás podríamos aprender muchas cosas de ellos también, ¿no?
So you can learn a lot. We can all learn a lot from the animals that live, that we share the earth with.
Yeah.
San Juan wouldn't be there if it hadn't been for American zoos. I mean, to have collaboration, to have the world look after such an important place like San Juan makes a lot of sense, because it gives it more importance, but it helps us achieve things that we probably wouldn't be able to if it hadn't that extra attention.
I think, whenever you develop a conservation project, particularly when it's not in your own country, and, let's face it, we're coming into Peru providing support for people here because we were asked to. We were invited to come here and help. So ultimately, the greatest success would be us walking away, us saying that these locations are safe, guano is being harvested in an ecologically friendly way, fisheries are being regulated, students are being trained to do the work that we're, flying thousands of miles to do when they can take a short bus ride and do it. So the success would be walking away one day and having this place, be safe and the animals be safe, and have nothing change and it be the way it is now forever.
Make sure that nobody out there moves at all. These guys are like super aware of everything going on in this direction. He's like looking right at me, so just make sure nobody moves.
Roger.
Start was in about 30 seconds ago. They just moved down closer to the water. Something startled them.
The Chicago Zoological Society has been involved here at Punta San Juan for about the past decade, helping to protect the wildlife at this very important reserve.